Hello friends, I hope you all are doing well. Today we are going to look over the case of the unsolved Villisca axe murders that took place in Villisca, Iowa. These crimes have gone unsolved for over 100 years, and it seems like this case will never be solved, as we'll see that there is really no concrete evidence on who did it. But it's still a very interesting case, and I thought we would definitely look into it. So don't forget, before we jump into our video, if you like true crime, hit that subscription button down below to be alerted every single time I post a new true crime case. On June 10th, 1912, at around 7 a.m., Mary Peckham noticed her neighbors were not awake yet. Normally they would have been awake for quite a while at this point, and their children would be outside playing in the yard, and the family's chicken and other farm animals would be outside. Her neighbors were Josiah and Sarah Moore. The couple had 4 children named Herman, Mary, Arthur, and Paul. The family was well off and liked in their community. The prior day, on June 9th, Mary invited her 2 friends, Ina and Lena, who were sisters, to spend the night at her house after the girls attended a church program for children. The program ended at around 9 p.m. A few people stayed and talked at the church until around 9:30, and Sarah ended up walking her daughter and her friends home, arriving home at around 9:45 to 10 o'clock p.m. So Mary noticed that the family was not awake, and of course during this time in the early 1900s, we see that people had a much different life than now. They would wake up really early and tend to their livestock and tend to their children and do all of these things very early. It wasn't like today where on the weekends we may sleep much later in the day. People just really didn't do that so much back then, especially if you live on like a farm type situation. So Mary noticed that nobody was awake, and she went and knocked on Josiah and Sarah's door. Nobody answered, and there was not a peep in the house, no movement. She couldn't see into any windows, so she decided to walk around back. She let out the family's chickens. She noticed like all of the livestock, their other animals, were still locked up, but she let out the chickens and then went back to her house to call Josiah's brother Ross to come and check on the house, because she thought that maybe he would be able to get in contact with his brother. And this is really important to the story because like when you first read it, you think, well, maybe something happened and they had to leave, or that could have been like my thoughts. Like, I barely ever see my neighbors, and so I would think like, oh, they're probably just like out of town if I didn't see them for like days and days and days. But back then people didn't travel like they do, and people didn't just get up and go like they do now. So this would be very odd for the family to just not be there when they're always there. Mary waited on the porch while Ross went into the home. He immediately walked out of the home after discovering 2 bodies on the bed covered in a sheet in the guest bedroom. Mary called Henry Horton, who was Villisca's peace officer. He searched the home and discovered the entire family, plus their 2 visitors, had been bludgeoned to death with an axe. He found the axe, which had been partially cleaned and had belonged to Josiah. The axe was in the bedroom where Ina and Lena were sleeping. Investigators at the time concluded that the murders had taken place at around 5 a.m. while the family was asleep. They believed that the killer waited in the family's attic while they were sleeping to come down and murder them, as there were 2 cigarettes partially finished in the attic. The theory has also been backed up by the fact that the house was completely locked up with no broken windows. The home had to be locked from the inside, so it's believed that the killer may have locked the door before he left. The killer also used the blade of the axe on Josiah and the blunt side on the rest of his victims. All of the bodies were hit around 20 to 30 times with the axe, and the killers went back to Josiah and Sarah's room after killing the children to attack them again several times with the axe. It is also believed that Lena was the only victim to be awake and see the killer, because she had a defensive wound on her arm and some blood and a small wound on her knee. Lena's nightgown was pushed up to her waist, and she did not have any undergarments on. It was determined at that time that Lena was not sexually assaulted, that the killer just took off her undergarments and pushed up her nightgown, but I don't know. I really feel like that is probably not 100% true. I really hope it is, because obviously getting murdered is horrible, and being awake and like being aware of what's going on, I'm sure she was horrified because she was a very young girl, around 12 years old. But I do feel that back then their forensic evidence was not spot on, and it wasn't like it is today where you could tell if somebody had been assaulted in that way. So hopefully she wasn't, and at the time, you know, the documents and the paperwork claim she wasn't, but I do feel like that may be different just because of the nature of the crimes, and also some things we will talk about later with some of the suspects for these murders, but they do claim at the time that she was not assaulted. The killer left the crime scene in an interesting fashion that does link the crime to a few other killers who were active at the time, mainly because of the use of the axe and the way the bodies were covered with sheets after the murders. The doctors on the scene had trouble distinguishing the bodies because their faces were beaten so badly. Another odd piece of evidence that was found in the home was a 4-pound slab of bacon left out. The killer also ransacked the home, any dresser, any sort of cabinet, looking for any extra sheets or bedding to cover the bodies, as well as cover mirrors and windows all throughout the house. And so the house was like in a big disarray because all of these cabinets were open and all the drawers were open and left any which way. The killer also left 2 kerosene lamps in the home, one at the foot of Josiah and Sarah's bed, and then one in the room where Ina and Lena were sleeping. There have been several suspects for the murders, including Frank F. Jones, who was an Iowa state senator. Josiah worked for Frank at his tool store for many years until he decided to leave and open his own business. Josiah took a lot of business away from Frank and even ruined his relationship with the John Deere dealership. Josiah allegedly had an affair with Frank's daughter-in-law, but this has never been proven. Frank was interrogated but never charged for these murders. Reverend George Kelly was a traveling minister who was in Villisca for the church event that the Moores attended on June 9th. He left the town by train at around 5 a.m. and allegedly bragged to a fellow passenger that there were 8 dead souls in Villisca. The bodies were not found until hours later, so he was very suspicious because of what he was saying on the train. George became fascinated with the case. He often wrote to the police and the family of the Moores. Investigators asked George if he knew any details about the murders, and he responded with a detailed account of the night of the murders, claiming he witnessed them. George also confessed to the murders, but the jury did not believe his confession, so he was exonerated. But George was arrested in 1914 because he was sexually harassing a woman who applied to be his secretary, and he was sent to a mental clinic in Washington, D.C. 3 years later, in 1917, George was again interrogated for the murders, but he now claimed he did not do them. He was then acquitted of the crimes. William Mansfield, whom some investigators believe that Frank Jones hired to kill Josiah, was also a suspect. 9 months before the murders, a similar axe murder occurred in Colorado Springs. Shortly after, 2 more murders occurred in Ellsworth, Kansas, and Paola, Kansas. These cases were very similar and believed to have been committed by the same person. They also have been linked to the several axe murders that took place along the Southern Pacific Railroad from 1911 to 1912, and the unsolved cases of the Axeman of New Orleans, which we have covered already. The link for that video will be in the description if you are interested. William was accused of killing the Moore family after he was accused of killing his wife, infant baby, father-in-law, and mother with an axe in Blue Island, Illinois on July 5, 1914. The crimes were done in a very similar manner, including covering all mirrors, windows, and the bodies with sheets. The killer also left a kerosene lamp at the foot of the bed, and a basin of water was found in the kitchen filled with bloody water. This killer also wore gloves, which was very uncommon at the time, and it is believed that William was aware that his fingerprints were on file at the federal military prison at Leavenworth. William was tried, but his alibi placed him in Illinois at the time of the Villisca murders, and he was released for a lack of evidence. He later sued the state and won $2,225. However, a man named R.H. Thorpe, who owned a restaurant in Shenandoah, Iowa, identified William as a man he saw boarding a train near Villisca. If this is true, then his testimony would disprove William's alibi and could prove another testimony from a woman named Vina Tompkins. She claims she heard 3 men plotting the murder in the woods early in the morning, which could have been Frank, William, and possibly another accomplice. Henry Lee Moore, who was not related to the Moore family, but he was a suspected serial killer, and he was convicted for the murders of his mother and grandmother several months before the Villisca murders. Henry was mostly suspected of these murders because he used an axe to kill his other victims. He was interrogated and considered a suspect, but was ultimately not charged. He has been linked to several other murders that William Mansfield has as well. Sam Moyer was also briefly a suspect, and he was Josiah's brother-in-law and often threatened to kill him, but his alibi cleared him of the crime. And because Villisca was so close to a train station, many people that were transient, that were just staying in Villisca for a short while, maybe they stayed for like a day or two, or even like a week or up to a month, just kind of like floating around, trying to, get some money, or maybe doing like odd jobs around the town. Many of those people were also suspects and questioned, but none of them were ever convicted of these murders. And in 2017, a book was published called The Man from the Train, where Bill James discusses the Villisca murders and believed they were a part of a large series of murders that most likely have been committed by one serial killer. This killer was named Paul Mueller, and he was an immigrant from Germany who was employed as a farmhand from a family in Massachusetts. This family was murdered, and there was a year-long manhunt in search for Paul in 1897. Paul was never found by police, but it is believed that the killer selected families that lived near railroad tracks, and he would strike in the middle of the night using an axe that was already in the home. He would cover all the mirrors and windows and lock the house before he left. There were also many murders where young ladies were sexually assaulted, just like Lena. I do believe that Paul is the most probable person to commit this murder. And this case is so crazy. I went down like a rabbit hole after this, because there are a ton of videos on YouTube, because you can visit the house. So if you're interested in like seeing what the house looks like and seeing the floor plan, it's very much put together like an old house was, and it's, like where you walk right in and you're like straight in, like kind of like a parlor room, living room, and there's like one bedroom attached to it, and then everything else is upstairs. So I found it really interesting to look at the house and also see how many like ghost hunters and people have visited this house, because you can go, I believe tours are like $10 to go visit the house, and there are so many videos because many people feel like the family haunts the house. Some people feel like the killer haunts the house, which seems kind of odd. I guess it just depends on like what you believe in ghost wise. If like a spirit could like travel back to a place and haunt them, or if maybe the killer came back to the house for some reason, I don't know. But there are so many videos where people are trying to get a ghost to like shut the door and do things like that, roll a ball across the floor, and it's definitely interesting. A lot of them seem very staged, I will say, but it's still interesting, and like I said, it was really interesting to see like inside of the house. So I definitely recommend watching a few of those, at least if you're interested in this case at all. It's very wild. It's very interesting for sure. And I find it really sad that this family was attacked in the middle of the night while they were sleeping. That's an absolutely terrible way to go. And I just feel really bad for them. And it seems like they were really liked by the town. It seems like this hurt that town very badly. A lot of people were very hurt by these murders, and the people of Villisca were then scared to be in their own homes at night. So that's got to be really sad, especially during those times when they didn't have like the security like we do now, how you could put like a security camera right on your front door and have all of these like special locks. And it's just really scary, right, to live during that time, and then you see like your neighbor or somebody who lives close to you, their entire family was killed in, you know, one night. That's absolutely horrifying. So I just feel really bad for them, and you know, hopefully someday there will be some sort of breakthrough on this case. It seems like now they're able to dig through, like forensic, like historic forensic specialists are able to really dig through and find evidence and find things that link these murders. So hopefully that will happen. So anyone affected by this can, you know, receive that closure, and the family can now hopefully rest at peace. So hopefully there is some sort of breakthrough for this, because I did find this case really sad, and it's just crazy like how many people were linked to it as well, all of these different murders. And it just goes to show that back then there were so many serial killers. Of course, they didn't use that term back then. That wasn't really invented until like the 70s, but it's just scary to see like how many people back then were serial killers and got away with crimes like these and were able to go undetected just because they traveled somewhere else and changed their name. So I find that so scary, and it makes me kind of happy that I was not alive during that time, because that's really horrifying. So otherwise, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you found this video informative or helpful in any way, please give me a thumbs up down below. I would really appreciate it. And if you have any cases you would like me to cover or any feedback about this video, please leave it in the comments down below. I'm always interested to hear what you all have to say. So thank you so much, and stay safe out there, and I hope you guys have a great day. Bye-bye.